Yeah, I don't think Mother knew about this.
Uncle Marvin was strangled by his own beard.
Yeah, you never saw it coming. And welcome, America, to America's Family History Show, Extreme Genes and ExtremeGenes.com. Fisher here, your radio root sleuth, on the program where we shake your family tree and watch the nuts fall out. Oh, we've got guests for you today. We're going to be talking to Catherine Thorne today. She is with our sponsors over at Legacy Tree Genealogist. She's a specialist in Ashkenazi Jewish research and Russian Jewish ancestry. You know, if you have Russian Jewish ancestry, you might be surprised to find out that you may not actually be Russian. She will explain coming up here in about 10 minutes. Then later in the show, we're going to talk to author Anne Hansen. She has put together what she calls creative nonfiction. Basically, it is the story of her search for her grandparents and their bizarre secrets, and how she put this story together, kind of filling in between the facts that she has with some of her creativity. And we'll talk about how you might be able to do the same thing as you write your family's story. Hey, it's time we check in with Boston. David Allen Lambert is standing by. He's the chief genealogist of the New England Historic Genealogical Society and AmericanAncestors.org. David, welcome back. Good to have you. What do you got for us today?
Well, you know, I was in Washington, D.C. recently, and it's a lot of fun discovering ancestors of the participants, but during my lunch hour, I worked on one of mine. My third great-grandfather, who was in the War of 1812, was an artificer with the United States Light Artillery. I just happened to ask one of the archivists at the National Archives whether or not the muster rolls from the U.S. Army military list from 1798 to 1914, did they still survive? And he says, yes, but they're pretty fragile. You can't look at them. But here's a finding guide. Well, the condition of the muster roll for my ancestors unit listed in as being silked. And silk is similar to being laminated, but they're more sturdy. So I said, is there any chance I can look at these? They rolled out a cart an hour later, and I was handling the original muster roll with my ancestor and all of the people he served with. Now, it's almost impossible to use the U.S. Army list to try to pull it by your unit because you can't search on the unit. You can only search on the person. So now I have a full list. I put it into Excel. I have 102 of these guys from Captain Stribling's company. I've put in their heights and ages and birthplaces from the Ancestry database, and I've used the muster roll to put in when they were sick or in the hospital killed. But I now know another battle my ancestors unit was at, which is the Battle of Sackett's Harbor. Really a major battle in New York during the War of 1812.
Right.
And he was at the Battle of Plattsburgh. The same week I get back, I get the War of 1812 magazine. Then they tell me in September they're having their managers meeting in Plattsburgh, New York in September. Guess who I think I'm going to be visiting?
That's pretty fun.
Well, that actually ties a little bit into the first story I want to share with our listeners, and this comes from Smithsonian Magazine. A Virginian artist who was before photography, when silhouettes were the popular medium for the ancestors, he went out and copied all of the ones he made between 1803 and 1812 as a duplicate and put it into a book. This book has arsenic, so they had to wear special equipment fish to go through when they digitized this book. And now there's over 1,000 images that you can search on the database. And the artist's name was William Batch, B-A-C-H-E. It's pretty amazing. And they've used Ancestry.com to research who the people are and basic biographical information. So who knows? Maybe one of these people is your ancestor. Folks, take a peek. Well, you know, let's go back a little further. And, of course, we all know from 23andMe how much Neanderthal you have in your family tree. Well, in the Jersey Channel Islands, there is a small island with a cave that was inhabited by possibly your ancestors 250,000 years ago. I want to let you know that what is lost is now found again, and the 16,000 plus stone tools, animal bones, and sediment samples that have been taken may be related to you.
Yeah, your Neanderthal ancestors. Amazing.
Exactly. Well, I love the stories about the mammoths and the way they want to bring them back with the DNA. And I nearly fell off my chair, Fish, when I read this. A giant meatball made from extinct mammoth DNA. No, don't worry, they didn't find a frozen mammoth and make a meatball out of them. They've used African elephant DNA, sheep cells inserted into a singular mammoth gene called a myoglobin, and they've created this meatball that looks the size of a bowling ball. And it smells strangely like crocodile. And they say it's currently not for consumption. But, you know, just like any meat, if you leave it out on the counter for a long time, probably not good to eat.
So tell me then, if it's not consumable, why did they make it?
Just because they can. This was presented at the Nemo Science Museum over in the Netherlands. You know, a lot of people like to research their ancestors, and that does include our president, Joe Biden, who is currently over in Ireland researching 10 of his 16 great-great-grandparents who left Ireland during the Great Potato Famine in the middle 19th century. So even the president is hooked on genealogy.
Sweet. But I imagine he's not doing his own research. If I'm to guess, I'm thinking they will present him with all the information that he was looking for.
I think he is touring cellar holes and walking in churches, probably with a tour guide. Going across the Irish Sea over to England, somebody was renovating their kitchen recently. And, you know, when you renovate your kitchen, sometimes you find old layers of wallpaper or maybe an old newspaper for filling. Yeah, how about 17th century artwork that's painted on the wall? These are murals that were painted in the 1660s. That's quite a nice surprise. I wouldn't ask for a new fresh coat of paint, would you?
No, I think that goes right to the museum, or maybe I'd want to sell it. But these pictures are remarkable because they're like 9 feet across. It's unbelievable.
Well, don't forget, American Ancestors may be closed for visitors in person, but we're still open. And if you want to take advantage of being an American Ancestors member, go to AmericanAncestors.org. And don't forget, you can use the coupon code EXTREME and save $20 on your membership at any time.
All right, David. Thank you very much. We'll talk to you at the back end of the show for Ask Us Anything. And coming up next, you're going to learn a lot about Russian Jewish ancestry and Ashkenazi Jewish ancestry from our next guest, Catherine Thorne from Legacy Tree Genealogist, when we return in 3 minutes on Extreme Genes, America's Family History Show.
Are you stuck in your genealogy research, frustrated by those brick walls that just won't budge, or confused by DNA test results and don't know where to begin? The experts at Legacy Tree Genealogists are here to help you find your missing ancestors and complete your family tree. With over 18 years of experience, Legacy Tree has assisted clients in every state and nearly every country worldwide. We have a vast network of on-site researchers, so no matter where your roots lie, we can work to uncover the answers you seek. Picture the thrill of making that long-awaited connection, finally discovering the missing link to your relatives. That's the joy Legacy Tree brings to countless clients just like you. Whether you're a beginning or seasoned researcher, brick walls happen. But with Legacy Tree by your side, that aha moment is within reach. Visit LegacyTree.com to learn more about how to work with Legacy Tree Genealogists. Put your family history in our hands, and together we'll unlock the stories of your past. Get started today at LegacyTree.com.
Hi, Genies. Fisher here, major fan of digitized newspapers. And how about a digitized newspaper site that has well over 800 million searchable pages? There is such a site. It's newspapers.com. They've got newspapers from all across the U.S., UK, Canada, Australia, and beyond. This is where you'll find those remarkable stories, plus birth and marriage announcements, obituaries, photos, ads, and so much more. Newspapers.com is where I found my great-aunt's marriage announcement, which was huge since her marriage was not properly recorded. And then there's the story of one relative's 50th anniversary party in 1900, with a list of all the attendees and gifts. Newspapers.com is like that box of chocolates we always hear about. You never know what you're going to get. What will you find? Sign up now at newspapers.com. Use the coupon code EXTREME at checkout to get a special extended 20% discount on a Publisher Extra subscription. Hey, Genies, as we've dug into our family history explorations over the past year, our community at Genealogy and Family History Breakthrough Strategies has taken off. This is where you can meet like-minded genealogists who can help you break through those brick walls and find a whole city behind it, occupied by ancestors whose names you don't even know yet. This is where you can learn from your fellow genies and ask questions, because many in our community have already been into some of the records you're looking for. Genealogy and Breakthrough Strategies is free. What a great place for brainstorming and getting to know other people who totally get your passion for family history research. If you're looking to take the next step in sharpening your skills, here's a great chance to learn from others and give back in areas you've already become expert in. So join us. That page again is Genealogy and Family History Breakthrough Strategies. It's a long name, but we cover a lot of territory. Genealogy and Family History Breakthrough Strategies. Hey, welcome back, Genies. It's Extreme Genes, America's Family History Show. Fish here, along with Catherine Thorne. She's an expert researcher over at our friends and sponsors at Legacy Tree Genealogist. She's a specialist in Ashkenazi Jewish research from the Russian Empire. And Catherine, welcome to Extreme Genes. Great to have you.
Lovely to be here.
We've just gone through Passover, of course, a great Jewish holiday throughout April. What else do we have coming up here? Because I know it's a busy time of year for Jewish celebrations.
It is. Next up is going to be in late May, we have Shavuot.
Which celebrates what?
That is the holidays celebrating the receivage of the Torah to the Jewish people.
Interesting. Well, you've been researching now for many years. Well, we talk about Russian Jewish research, but that doesn't necessarily mean Russia, does it?
No. So there's a pretty big misconception. I have a lot of clients that come and say, well, my ancestors are from Russia. And while technically that was part of the Russian Empire, that area that most Jewish ancestors come from is actually Ukraine, Moldova, Belarus, Lithuania, and Poland now.
Wow.
But prior to World War II, these were all parts of the USSR. And then before that, before World War I, part of the Russian Empire.
Wow. So you really have to kind of know a lot of stuff because every area is different as far as research goes. How do you, first of all, help people separate out which country their people were from? I mean, if they think they're from Russia, which technically, as you say, is correct, how do you help them kind of identify exactly where they were from, particularly if they didn't know what village they were from or what little specific area?
There are a couple of ways. So the first way is more the traditional way that a lot of people work with immigrant ancestors. So finding their passenger lists and their naturalization paperwork and determining from those what area that we're actually looking at in Russia. And there will be clues as far as, in some cases, there were locations that were once part of Austria that became part of Russia or the USSR after World War I. And so that can help you narrow down to a location, or even just they'll list a specific gubernia, which is a province in the Russian Empire, that will point you to a location within those other countries that were once part of Russia.
Wow. It just sounds so complicated to many of us who've never had to deal with so many border changes. I mean, even within the United States, you have counties that change borders and the like. But when you have countries that are changing names and locations and what their borders are at which times, and fairly rapidly too, right? I mean, it often happens quickly. You really have to know what time and place exactly and try to narrow it down. How do you deal with researching over there? Is there a lot of material online?
There is. It is dependent upon the country itself.
Okay.
So depending on the country, there is either a lot of material online. I will say for Ukraine, there is a lot of Jewish material online that can either be accessed through the Family History Library, or there is a citizen archivist, Alex Krakovsky. He has an online archive where he's personally gone to the archives and scanned images of the books. Lithuania has an online system, as does Latvia and Poland. The one that's really hard is, of course, Belarus. They have no digital archives, and there are very few copies of the records anywhere online.
So how do you deal with that when you come across somebody who has ancestry from Belarus?
Well, the first thing we would do is, first of all, ensure that there are no records online. And then we would go to work with an on-site researcher. So someone who lives in Belarus that has access to the archives that we can work with to say, okay, we want to look at this set of records. What is available there? Another option, while more time consuming and requiring a little bit more information from your part, is to work with the archives directly. So sending them individual requests for individual records. They won't complete genealogical research, but if you know you have an ancestor born in a certain town on a certain day, you can send a request in either Russian or Belarusian to the Belarusian archives, and they will search for the record for you.
Well, of course, over here, depending on when you were born, there's certain privacy laws, right? How far back does somebody have to have been born for them to say, oh, yeah, here's the record of the birth?
In the former Russian Empire countries, typically that mark is 1918. So that's the date of the Russian Revolution. And so all records prior to 1918 are typically publicly available, and all records after 1918 are not.
Interesting. Okay. Well, I'm thinking about the waves of immigrants that came over. I mean, in the 1840s and 50s, it was the Irish. And then later on in the 19th century, we had the Italians come over. The Russians and the Jews, or the Russian Jews also, and the Ashkenazi Jews from all over the place, they started coming in the 80s, right? The 1880s?
Yes. So the largest wave of Jewish immigration to America began in the 1880s, from 1880 to 1924. Roughly 2 million Eastern European Jews arrived in America.
Wow.
So a massive amount of people coming primarily into those Eastern Seaboard immigration ports.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so did you see a lot of name changes as a result of people coming over here trying to Americanize their names? Is that a real challenge for you?
It can be a very significant challenge with Americanization of names. The last name is more common with a lot of people doing immigrant research. You can typically find that information on their passenger list. The real struggle is with the first name when we're doing Jewish immigration. So traditionally, a lot of Jewish people have two names. So they have a Hebrew name or an Aramaic name, and then they have typically a name from the region that they're living in. So for our Jewish ancestors living in Eastern Europe, that might be Yiddish or a Russian name. And then they have a third name when they immigrate. So they come to America and they say, actually, this name is too hard for people to say, or I stick out like a sore thumb, so I'm going to change my Chaim to a Harry. Okay. And so finding that connection can be a little difficult. One thing that I would suggest to help with that is unique to Jewish research is looking at the cemeteries. So you want to go and find the grave of your immigrant ancestor, and on that, very frequently, there's a Hebrew inscription that will include both their Hebrew name or sometimes Yiddish name and their father's Hebrew or Yiddish name. And that name is going to be much closer to the name that they went by when they were living in Europe. And that can help you find them much faster than it would through trying to locate them on passenger lists with a name that they didn't even go by when they came over.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, it's got to be so complicated. I mean, I think about, okay, in America and a lot of other places, Elizabeth often went by Betty, or Henry went by Harry, or Robert went by Bob. Is there an association with those Yiddish names and those Hebrew names to a name they actually adopted for use in the United States?
I would say most frequently it is the sound of the name.
Really?
So if the first initial sound is like an H, their name might become Harry.
Okay.
If it's Bila, which is a woman's name, it might become Betty. And so that initial sound will stay the same. Typically, there's no shared meaning between the names. And sometimes it is, unfortunately, completely random. They heard a name and they really liked it and they adopted that name.
Wow. I just think of your job here, Catherine. This sounds really complex. I'm glad that people who do this type of research have you to work with. This is amazing. So let's talk a little about Ashkenazi Jewish research and how that differs from Russian Empire research.
Okay. So the first biggest difference is that, of course, the name changes are more complex when we're dealing with Jewish records because we are dealing with three potential names that they could be going by.
Right.
The other thing is Russian Empire records were separated by religion. And so the Jewish records were separate from the rest of the records. Russian Orthodox were separate from the Jewish records, were separate from the Catholic records. And so you're wanting to find records for that specific religion. And very frequently, those records are not for every single individual town. You need to find the exact town that they were from in order to then figure out, okay, where were these people registering at? What synagogue were they going to register their children that were being born, rather than the exact town that they were living in? And there are gazetteers that can help you figure that out once you know what town your family was from.
Interesting. How did the Holocaust impact the records in these areas?
So for the Holocaust in the Russian Empire, there is some impact in the records, primarily in terms of just wartime damage to the records. I know in Belarus, especially during World War II, there was a large loss of records, especially in the area just next to Poland. A large number of records were lost. So sometimes you will find large gaps in the records prior to 1940 in just the Jewish records at that time. There wasn't really a concerted effort to destroy Jewish-specific records. However, one resource that was destroyed very heavily in the Holocaust were Jewish tombstones in Eastern Europe.
Yes.
And so they were taken and were actually broken up and used as paving stones in some places.
Yes.
And so that's a massive resource because, of course, as I mentioned before, the father's name is listed on, and you could trace the family back using the cemetery. That resource is in a lot of places now gone.
Have they actually ever taken some of these paving stones and created a database of the information that's on them?
In the case of the ones that have been broken up, they're typically in such bad shape that I don't think that they could. As far as the cemeteries that are still standing, there are plenty of databases that have records related to what is located inside of the cemeteries.
Wow. You've got a lot of knowledge here, Catherine, to share with your clients. Thank you so much for talking to us about it. I find it always really interesting to find out about different types of research and different groups of people and how they came over here and how we figure out who they are and what happened to them. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
And coming up next, a woman who learned from her dad that her grandparents may not have been who they said they were. A lot of secrets there. She did a lot of research, and now she's written a book. She calls it Creative Nonfiction. You're going to want to hear what Anne Hansen has to say about writing histories in this way and what she learned. It's all coming up next in 5 minutes when we return on Extreme Genes, America's Family History Show. Back on the job at Extreme Genes, America's Family History Show, and ExtremeGenes.com. It is Fisher here with another fascinating guest. She is an author. It's her first book. It's called Buried Secrets, Looking for Frank and Ida, and the author is Anne Hansen from Brookline, Massachusetts. And Anne, welcome to Extreme Genes. It's great to have you.
Fisher, it is wonderful to be here. Thanks for having me.
You know, I know this is your first time around, and this is kind of in the same vein as what I've been working on lately, something you've called, and I think it's a great term, creative nonfiction, which basically fills in the gaps and conversations that we can only imagine, but still keeps it true to the facts. And this is about finding your grandparents.
Yeah, it's a story of, the quest that began when I was in college, and my dad had always been mystified about his parents' extreme secrecy about their past. And, as a child, he was always wondering, why don't I have any relatives? Why do my parents just refuse to talk about their past? It was really like taboo to ask questions about their past. So when I hit college, he asked me if I could research his parents, validate their family tree, learn more about their families and their backgrounds. And I searched and I searched and I searched, and I could not find a single thing.
Really? I mean, you're talking about with their names, and you couldn't find where they lived? They weren't in the census? Were they going by assumed identities?
Well, I think I won't tell you all of the details, but let's just say they invented identities that suited their purposes.
Ah. Okay, that makes sense. So talk about the process here, because you are not by profession a writer, and yet I've read one of your sample chapters, and it's very well done, and I'm very impressed with it. It's like, okay, I got to do as well as Anne Hansen does here with mine.
Well, you are very kind. Thank you. Well, I had been interviewing my dad, doing family history interviews for years. So I had all of this material and information. It's a sad story in some ways. My dad's two favorite brothers both died suddenly in the year 2000, and he came into possession of his parents' photo collection. And I finally persuaded him to let me look through the photos to see if I could find out anything that would help us solve the mystery of our missing parents and grandparents. And based on this photo, I ultimately got this little clue that led to more things that pretty much like blew the whole case open. And so this happened in 2003. I'm a research pack rat. I just save everything I come across.
Of course.
So I had reams of research that I had done on my grandparents' real pasts. Then I had many, many hours of recorded interviews with my dad. And my dad was actually the first one to say I should write a book.
Right.
And I said, okay, how hard can that be? I had no idea what I was getting into. I thought, okay, it'll be, 6 months to a year. I'll write the book. So I soon realized that I didn't know what I was getting into, and I took some classes at this wonderful writing center in Boston called Grub Street. I had actually been a newspaper reporter in the past, so I knew how to write 20 inches, an old-fashioned newspaper, you have a 20-inch story. And I had done some corporate communications and writing.
Yeah, but that's all entirely different style and doesn't really require imagination or anything, because you're talking about facts here, but also creating, I've always called it the grout between the tiles, right? You've got the tiles. They're just the things that keep it all together.
Yes. So one of the smartest things I did was start taking classes at Grub Street, and I learned how to write narrative nonfiction in the genre of what we call creative nonfiction, where you stick as close as you can to the facts. I mean, obviously, when you're thinking of conversations you had with somebody 20 years ago, you can't remember the exact words.
No, of course
So
not.
you just recreate it as best you can. So I started doing these writing classes in 2007. And so I was working on the writing, and I was still always talking to my dad. We'd be having a conversation, and then all of a sudden he'd just sort of come up with this interesting little tidbit about his parents or his childhood or whatever. And I'd say, why didn't you tell me this before? And he'd say, I didn't think of it before.
That's how it works, though, with the family history interviews, right?
Yes.
You go talk to people, and you got to keep going back because it gets their minds going, right?
Exactly. My dad and I'd be down in Philadelphia visiting, and he and I would just be, hanging out after dinner talking. And then we'd get on to the whole family topic, and then he would start saying oh, Dad, this is great. Hold on. I've got to get a pen. I've got to write this down. So it was really an iterative process of going back and forth. I learned how to write narrative nonfiction, but I also found I had a lot of facts, but there were scenes that I know occurred, but there's just no way for me to know the exact details. And that's when I got the idea of starting doing imagined scenes where we know certain things happen. We just don't know the exact details. So I started adding in the imagined scenes. And so I had a first draft of the book done in about 2010 or 11, and I gave that draft to my dad, and this turned into one of his favorite leisure activities, reading the book about his life. And then he'd be lying on the couch, and then he'd think of something, he'd call me up. Hey, Annie, I just remembered. I want to make sure you put this in the book. So I had multiple drafts of the book going over time, and then there were times when I didn't do anything for several years, because life intervened, and I was really
funny
busy.
How that works sometimes.
Yes. And, I was fortunate enough. I met my husband in 2001, and we got married in 2010. So, lots of fun things going on that had nothing to do with the book.
Well, what a great lesson for all of us who would like to write a history. I know I hear from people all the time saying, what's the best way to do this? Well, we can write histories where we write out the things that we know, but certainly the most interesting way to tell a story is the way you're describing, and that is to kind of fill in the blanks here with these imagined conversations that likely did happen in one form or another, right?
Mm-hmm. And one of the other things I learned, some very good advice I got, there were times where I'm writing a real scene where I'm the protagonist and I'm in it. And I was afraid of, well, if I write it this way, I might offend someone or hurt their feelings or whatever. And some very good advice I got was just write it as if nobody but you was going to read it. And then you can always edit it later. Yeah. And I did that, and I found that it was just very freeing. You're no longer censoring yourself. So for, a few scenes where, I didn't want to hurt someone's feelings, I took very little out. It was just a very freeing feeling, and it ended up me just writing much more fluidly, and I ended up taking out very little that I thought somebody might be unhappy with or hurt their feelings.
Sure. Well, and that's partly because of the fact that you're talking about fairly recent times, and there are people still living who remember these individuals and who love them and had some connections with them. And that's part of the problem we have in writing regular histories, yet alone a creative nonfiction like you're talking about.
Yes, especially when you're writing about living people. You're not going to please everyone.
Nope, that's right.
But I do think that honesty coupled with kindness are the best policy.
Yeah, that's great advice. She's Anne Hansen. She is the author of Buried Secrets, Looking for Frank and Ida, a great creative nonfiction, and you can get it at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, the usual places. Anne, thanks so much for coming on and taking your time. Enjoyed it.
Thank you for having me.
Good luck with the book.
Thank you.
And coming up next, David Allen Lambert with another round of Ask Us Anything on Extreme Genes, America's Family History Show. Hi, Genies. Fisher here, major fan of digitized newspapers. And how about a digitized newspaper site that has well over 800 million searchable pages? There is such a site. It's newspapers.com. They've got newspapers from all across the U.S., UK, Canada, Australia, and beyond. This is where you'll find those remarkable stories, plus birth and marriage announcements, obituaries, photos, ads, and so much more. Newspapers.com is where I found my great aunt's marriage announcement, which was huge since her marriage was not properly recorded. And then there's the story of one relative's 50th anniversary party in 1900, with a list of all the attendees and gifts. Newspapers.com is like that box of chocolates we always hear about. You never know what you're going to get. What will you find? Sign up now at newspapers.com. Use the coupon code EXTREME at checkout to get a special extended 20% discount on a Publisher Extra subscription.
Are you stuck in your genealogy research, frustrated by those brick walls that just won't budge, or confused by DNA test results and don't know where to begin? The experts at Legacy Tree Genealogists are here to help you find your missing ancestors and complete your family tree. With over 18 years of experience, Legacy Tree has assisted clients in every state and nearly every country worldwide. We have a vast network of on-site researchers, so no matter where your roots lie, we can work to uncover the answers you seek. Picture the thrill of making that long-awaited connection, finally discovering the missing link to your relatives. That's the joy Legacy Tree brings to countless clients just like you. Whether you're a beginning or seasoned researcher, brick walls happen. But with Legacy Tree by your side, that aha moment is within reach. Visit legacytree.com to learn more about how to work with Legacy Tree Genealogists. Put your family history in our hands, and together we'll unlock the stories of your past. Get started today at legacytree.com.
Hey, Genies. As we've dug into our family history explorations over the past year, our community at Genealogy and Family History Breakthrough Strategies has taken off. This is where you can meet like-minded genealogists who can help you break through those brick walls and find a whole city behind it, occupied by ancestors whose names you don't even know yet. This is where you can learn from your fellow genies and ask questions, because many in our community have already been into some of the records you're looking for. Genealogy and Breakthrough Strategies is free. What a great place for brainstorming and getting to know other people who totally get your passion for family history research. If you're looking to take the next step in sharpening your skills, here's a great chance to learn from others and give back in areas you've already become expert in. So join us. That page again is Genealogy and Family History Breakthrough Strategies. It's a long name, but we cover a lot of territory. Genealogy and Family History Breakthrough Strategies. All right, it is time once again for Ask Us Anything on Extreme Genes, America's Family History Show. David Allen Lambert is back from NEHGS. And David, our first question is from Rudy in San Francisco. And Rudy says, gents, I feel very distinguished.
I do too.
In the 1840s, my ancestors were farmers in New Hampshire. However, I heard they were factory workers in Lowell, Massachusetts about a decade later. How can I confirm this and maybe learn why they made such a huge change? Rudy.
Well, I mean, first thing that comes to mind, the United States Census. So if you find them on the 40 census in New Hampshire, hopefully a decade later you're surfacing them in Massachusetts in 1850 in Lowell. The nice thing about Massachusetts is we have two state censuses that were kept. One was in 1855, so you don't have to wait another full decade if you want to try to catch them. And say if they showed up in 1851, 52 range, so the 55 might catch them there as well.
Yep.
The other thing, city directories. Lowell was a thriving industrial city during the Industrial Revolution. The factories were popping up everywhere, and it doesn't surprise me that a farmer may move his family for more money and more opportunity to a city. My family did similar moves from northern New England into the factories of Massachusetts in the 19th century. And I'm sure in your own ancestry fish, you've probably seen people that have changed occupations multiple times.
Oh, and they did, because we had things, for instance, there was the Panic of 1837. There was another Panic of 1857, and this is what they called them at those times, but it led to these financial recessions or depressions for a while. My great-great-grandfather Fisher started out as a cabinet maker of some note, and then he had to stop doing that. He was a cartman right out of that period, which was a real come down from where he had been as a craftsman. And then he became a real estate agent because of all the people coming into New York City with the famine over in Ireland, right? So he did that for about 12 years, and then he became a machinist for the Singer Sewing Machine Company, making sewing machines. And he did that for maybe a decade before finally retiring. So, you know, you can see they're very different types of things.
Absolutely. And the other thing, of course, are newspapers. So you find somebody in a city directory, it may actually give you the address of where they're working. So if you contact, say, the Center for Lowell History up in Lowell, Massachusetts, you could find out what factory in, say, 1855 was located at that spot, find factory owners. And in the perfect world, they're very, very rare to find. You might find records of the employees. You might find a record, a lawsuit about the company. Maybe they had fraudulent ways of treating their employees and they were brought to court. Maybe there was a disastrous fire or something. Or, better yet, find out what the address would be now and drive your family there. And hopefully you're not in the middle of like a parking lot for Walmart. I mean, this is great ways of investigating a story in your family history by proving it with records that you can find online with sites like Ancestry.com or American Ancestors, and then connecting it and going there. I mean,
that's a lot of fun. There's no more fun than going someplace and finding the exact spot. Although I'll say on one of my wife's lines, we found out we were in a parking lot and her ancestor is buried under the parking lot because they hadn't removed all the bodies when they built this thing. Very few of them got moved out. So when you park, you might be actually right on top of him. It's like kind of a frightening thing.
Would that be reserved parking for the family?
Yeah, would probably be the case. But it is a lot of fun to go there and see where it may have been and if there was actually any remnants of a building or something like that.
Yeah, you could walk the same streets and see the same buildings that your ancestor did.
Absolutely great stuff. And, of course, stop by the Historical Society and see what they've got to say, as you mentioned, Dave. So great question. Absolutely. Thank you very much, Rudy. Hope that helps you, and good luck on it. We got another one coming up next from Hawaii when we return in 3 minutes on Extreme Genes, America's Family History Show. All right, here we go. Our final question this week on Ask Us Anything as we return on Extreme Genes, America's Family History Show. And David, this question comes from John. He says, Fisher and David, aloha from Honolulu.
Oh, aloha.
Yes. I recently found a newspaper ad of an ancestor in a scrapbook of my great-grandmother. It's for a floral shop of her father. It has no date or clue to which paper it was in or specifically where it was from. Any idea how I can solve this mystery? Great question, John. And the best way to go about it is to actually Google specific phrases from within that ad and see if something comes up. And then I would say, if you don't find anything that way, go to newspapers.com and try it the same way. If you have any idea at all, even the state that it was in, you might be able to narrow it down if the phrases are particularly common. But often that can bring something up. I had somebody actually show me a story they had once about Pablo Picasso, talking about how he would paint these really weird paintings and people would buy them thinking there was some deep meaning to it and how it was just foolishness. And she wanted to know what it's from. I said, I think I might be able to figure that out. So I actually took some of the lines from the newspaper story and put it into the search engine with quotes around it from newspapers.com, and it brought it up. Told me it was from August of 1965, I think it was, something like that. And then I was able to actually get a nice, cleaner image of it, and it's digitized. So you can find maybe even more ads as a result of that once you narrow down exactly the location of where that came from. And I think ads are fascinating, Dave, don't you? Because they reflect the personality of the person who places it.
It's true. In fact, it's when we were talking about my third great-grandfather in the War of 1812, about 15 years before, he ran a store. And the store's still there. In fact, they rededicated it last year. I was part of that. But the ads for the items that they sold was almost as good as having an account book.
Yeah.
Because I got to see the items he was selling, so I know where he was buying stuff from. I mean, some of it was timber from up north. I mean, it's a great insight, and it brings a person's location where they work alive if you can get details from advertisements.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. Here's one I found from the brother of my third great-grandmother in New York City. He was a confectioner there and really quite well known. And I found this ad from 1838, and this had to have been like a 3-page poem or something that these people wrote. It's incredible. He says, "Come all ye who have most desire to live, and like the good things that this world can give, pray stop one moment with John Pease and Son, and in Division Street, where 44 and 1 burst on the sight, behold, not ask for more, the rich confections that he has in store." And this goes on and talks about sponge cakes and Lafayette's and pound cakes and jellies and raisins and fancies and citrons and plums. It's like, how many weeks did it take them to write this poem before they published it in 1838? But it's really fun.
How did they write it with not going to run and get some food? I mean, it's made me hungry. What a sweet story. No pun intended.
Yeah, that's true. Then we have candy, which we just have made as beautiful as can be, called the braid. And then we have Iceland moss as clear as ladies' kisses, which we hold most dear. And then our pastry that will fill your eye of oyster, cranberry, custard, pumpkin pie. I mean, it just goes on forever. It's really fun stuff. So good luck with that, John. That might be the best way to figure out where that ad came from, and then see what rabbit hole you can follow it down to and get a lot more information. David, thanks so much. We'll talk to you again next week.
All right. Sounds good, my friend. Until later.
All right. That's our show for this week. Thanks once again to our guest, Catherine Thorne from Legacy Tree Genealogists, our sponsors, talking about Russian Jewish ancestry and Ashkenazi Jewish ancestry, and to author Anne Hansen, talking about creative nonfiction, how she actually wrote the story of the mysterious grandparents she knew virtually nothing about. If you missed any of it, of course, catch the podcast. We're on Apple Media, TuneIn Radio, Spotify, ExtremeGenes.com, and iHeartRadio. Talk to you again next week. Thanks for joining us. And remember, as far as everyone knows, we're a nice, normal family.